Amen. At this time, we will be hearing words of reflection and tributes from Dr. Samuel Huffman's son. Please receive now Craig Huffman.
Good afternoon. My heart is heavy, but I want to celebrate my father's life. And so I have some words here, and I had to put them on paper. Those who know me know I can talk all day off the top of my head, but today I needed something on paper. So as I was up last night thinking about what I would say today about my father and his life, I couldn't help but think about a theme that was a significant part of our conversations over the last year. And it really relates to who my father was and how he lived his life. A little over a year ago, I experienced an injustice, and in my journey, my father became one of my closest advisors. Like most children, when I was growing up, I did not always take my father's advice as seriously as I probably should have. But as I got older, I realized how fortunate I was to have a good relationship with my father and how wise he truly was. My experience with the injustice led us to discuss a character in the Old Testament. The character was about the life of a heroic woman named Esther. I'm not sure how many of you know the story of Esther, but in my family, we've come to frequently use an expression that we refer to as an Esther moment. So if you could indulge me, I'd like to use the story of Esther as a reference point for my father's life. And Pastor, I promise I'm not up here to give a sermon. Pastor Moss is best equipped to do that. By the way, we went to college together. Esther was born poor at a time, and a culture where her people were oppressed. She was raised by her uncle Mordecai, a man who took his people's history, plight, and purpose very seriously. Mordecai poured into Esther the values of her people, a pride for her people, and a greater sense of purpose for her life. In a similar manner, my father was born poor and raised by a strong, God-fearing single mother at a time when African Americans had limited opportunity or hope. My father would frequently tell me stories of how challenging it was for African Americans when he was young. The segregated South at that time did not give many African Americans a sense of hope or opportunity. To combat this, my father's mother poured a strong sense of pride into my father for being an African American and encouraged him to believe that he could make a difference in the world. She brought him up in the Word of God and with what most folks now refer to as good old-fashioned values, the kind of values that unfortunately not as many of our kids are learning today. In case some people haven't heard the rest of the story of Esther, let me give you a really quick summary. In a divinely appointed series of events, Esther becomes the queen of the most powerful empire in that period of time. She went from being poor and without access in society to becoming a leader that was admired and respected. Esther gained influence and success, and yet even with this, she was confronted with a defining moment. That defining moment is when she had to make a decision on whether she would stand up for her people or pretend that she had no responsibility to her people. In essence, she had to decide, do I remain comfortable or do I stand for something greater than myself? Esther, after all, could have simply said, I got mine, and that's all that matters. Esther had a choice to make on whether she would use her influence and access to help and ultimately save her people. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with this story, this is a spoiler alert. Esther made the right decision, and that decision was to look beyond her own self-interest and to make an effort to save her people. And in the process, she ultimately uplifted them. Now, back to my father. In the 1960s, my father left Alabama to pursue a career in Chicago. He went from very humble beginnings to gaining influence and respect in a distinguished career of public and community service. He and my mother moved to an upper middle class South Side neighborhood, and not only were they driving nice cars, but for a short period of time, my daddy even had a driver. As a little black boy living in the segregated South with no family connections, it would have been very hard for him to imagine what he was able to accomplish. My father was able to do well relative to his humble beginnings, and he could not have simply gotten his and not thought about anyone else. He could have just been the king of his castle and when presented with countless Esther moments, and there were many in his life, just pretended to stay quiet rather than trying to help others. Last summer, this couldn't have been more evident for me and my family when we went down to his hometown of Troy, Alabama to celebrate his 80th birthday. Story after story, cousin after cousin, recounted how my daddy made a difference in their lives. He helped some secure jobs. My cousin Marcus recounted how he taught him that you never, never, never give up. And then there were the stories of him just being thoughtful and generous with his time and money. I want to now take a moment and thank my family from Troy for being here today and for being part of that celebration of his life last July. Because of all that you did for my dad that day, we truly gave him his flowers while he was alive. And we can take comfort in knowing that he knew we loved and appreciated him. My daddy uplifted our family and the community. He helped to uplift the people of his beloved hometown of Troy, Alabama, and in this big city of Chicago that he grew to love and call home. Time and time again, my father was tested with his Esther moments, and he never flinched from doing what he thought would be right and in the best interests of the larger community. While we're all sad that he is no longer with us, given the countless stories, jokes, advice, golf games, family outings, and memorable quotes that he gave to so many of us, his actions and commitment to family, friends, and the less fortunate is what probably will be the best example that I, and I think most of you that knew my father, will remember the most. Rest in peace, Daddy.
Amen. Thank you, Craig, for giving us that insight into your father's life. We have also received several quotes from persons who have had the opportunity to know Dr. Huffman personally, who sent their regards, and we will share those at this time. Dr. Samuel Huffman was a good man, an upstanding member of his community, a consummate professional, a deeply devoted husband and father, and an example of what we all should aspire to become. He will be sorely missed, but long remembered for the service to his community and his loving nature that is his legacy. Richard M. Daley, former mayor, City of Chicago. Dr. Huffman was dedicated to helping people and proved his ability to succeed under extremely difficult circumstances. We were all very proud of Sam and his endless efforts to help others. God bless Sam Huffman. Dennis Healy, co-chairman of Turtle Wax Incorporated. In fact,